Welcome, everybody, to another fabulous show of Merica F1 with our buddy and our friend from Experience XO, Scott. We have
Hey, Sherm.
one of the best starts to the season ever. I mean, 60
Ridiculous.
DNFs, 4 safety cars. We got Hulkenberg in that crappy kick Sauber doing his ordinary scoring. He's number 7th. That's his thing. If you look within the last 3 years, he's always 7th or 6th. And Lance Stroll, like who they didn't show at all during the race, finishing in 6th. We got Kimi Antonelli in his rookie debut, scoring 4th. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Alex Albon in the Williams going for 5th. We got the team from Ferrari, the team that everybody wants to do well. Very disappointing. We'll talk about it. 8th and 10th. And we got Lando, Calrissian, Norris, and starting out the season, because this is his year. If he's going to win a world title, it's going to be this year, because next year, all bets are off. Max, who looked really good in that. I don't think that car's really that great, Scott. It's really not. And that was all 100% Max's driving ability to get that car in number 2. And the fans were the winners in this Grand Prix. Let's recap a thrilling Australian Grand Prix with Scott from Experience XO here on American F1. And cue the music.
Yeah, Merica F1. Merica F1. It's a golden run. Merica F1.
Now, we like everybody to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification for our channel. And remember to go to our friends on Instagram, experiences.xo. And you get to see some nice behind the scenes views of the paddock and some very interesting footage that you wouldn't normally see on the internet. Scott, how's your head doing after this first Grand Prix of the season?
Can we just have every race be a wet race, please?
Yes.
I mean, it turns children into goats and heroes and legends into dogs. I mean, Fernando and Carlos crash.
Out.
Kimi Antonelli, first race ever from P16 to P4. Oh my God! That's why you'll see me in full Mercedes gear and the IWC.
And it looks very nice. Wow. What's that watch there? What's that watch, Scott? Is that a Hamilton watch?
No. This is an IWC chronograph. It's a pilot chronograph. It's an official Mercedes watch, team watch.
Yeah. Very nice.
It's from IWC, automatic movement, and you will see the Mercedes drivers, the team principal, and sort of the upper level employees on the team wearing this kind of watch. There's several different others. This is the chronograph. There's a less expensive one called the Mark 10. That's about $1,000 less. And there's even a Toto Wolff $102,000 shockproof watch.
No way.
It's a little.
That's crazy. A nice watch. What I like about it is it matches your hat and it matches the insignia on the Mercedes jersey that you're wearing. It's pretty. You're very coordinated today,
That's
Scott.
The intent of the watch.
Now let's start out talking about Lando Norris and McLaren and Oscar, who looked like he was going to finish second in that race. And in my opinion, he could have won that race if they'd have just left it alone and let them race. He had the best pace that day yesterday. Don't you think, Scott?
You know what? The biggest loser of this race is papaya rules. What the hell were they doing imposing team orders on Oscar on the first race of the year when there's no undisputed leader in the points championship in Oscar's home race? Are you kidding
100%
me?
agree.
They
agree.
Destroyed his race. Look, he was in what racing drivers call the flow state. In the flow state, you are an automatic pilot and you are thinking of nothing else other than driving that race car as fast as it'll go, I know what it is, even as a weekend warrior.
Right.
And, like when I was like 2 seconds slower than the pro driver in a car that I was in. Oscar was in the flow state. He was faster than Lando, period. Full stop.
Period.
He was about to overtake him. He came to within DRS range and they pumped the brakes and said, hold position. I said, what the hell are they doing? Why?
Why?
Why? It's not the first lap. And what did he do the next lap? They told him that he made a mistake, right?
I think he broke his concentration, right? Don't you think? Like he was concentrating. He's like, I got him. I'm going to pass him. I'm faster. And then they said, hey, hold station. And he was like, wait, wow.
He's
And
like,
it just kind of deflated him.
He said, yeah, but I'm faster. And what that did, it broke what, again, racing drivers call the flow state, and it broke his concentration. And then he made a mistake. And then after he made the mistake and was 3 seconds behind or whatever, then they said, oh, we take it back. But it was too late. The moment had passed. Lando is naturally a little faster than Oscar, and he had scampered off into the distance, and it was too late.
One of the interesting things that I saw, Scott, was Lando, Oscar, and Max were literally like 20 seconds ahead of George at one part of the race. Yeah. Like it was them three and they were gone. And then the rest of the field.
Yes.
Is it because they're that far ahead of George in the rest of the field, or was that race specific?
I think in general, the Mercedes is not quite as fast as the Red Bull and the McLarens. It's as simple as that. I would love it to be different because, I'm obviously wearing Mercedes stuff today. But realistically, I actually think it's probably the next best car right now, at least at that track it was, I think, in the rain after the McLaren. The RB21, the Red Bull is a terrible car right now. And you see that Max is just on a different level than any other driver in the sport. I mean, every single driver who goes up against Max gets destroyed because the car is undrivable by somebody who doesn't have those lightning hair trigger reflexes that Alex Albon talked about. It is so sensitive and it is so front heavy and backlight that no one else can drive it but Max, because Max is a freak of nature. And I mean that in a good way. And what you saw happen with Liam is sad, but not really unsurprising. I bet you that if he were driving a Racing Bull, he would have been up there in the top 10, because that Racing Bull car, man, that's lit.
That looked like it not only looked stable, but on the cornering, because for, I'd say the first, 20 laps, Lewis was right behind Yuki and he could not pass him. He just couldn't do it. And then he was behind Alex and he couldn't pass him either. And both the Williams and the Racing Bull looked like they looked like top 5 cars. They both did.
The Racing Bull car especially looked lethal. And I wonder what would have happened if we had like a Carlos or an Alex Albon in that. I think it would have perhaps even gone a little faster.
I think Yuki had great pace. I just think they screwed up the strategy at the end, just like Ferrari.
Well, yeah, he
finished out of the points, right?
Yeah, I mean, Yuki did finish outside of the points.
I think he was 12th.
In particular, correct. He was
12th.
And he started P5. And why? Because they kept him out way too long on slicks when it was raining. And by the time he came out, he got undercut by everybody.
Yeah.
And comes out like whatever, P10, P12. And that killed him. And Yuki should have been high up in the points, and he wasn't. And I'm just going to say something. Some of the people who were behind Ferrari's very horrific strategy in 2022, like Mr. Mecchi, are now running Racing Bulls.
You're kidding me? I didn't know that. Wait, say that again.
Messi.
I did not know that.
The team principal of Racing Bull was the sporting director at Ferrari in 2022. He was Binotto's designated successor until Binotto got fired. And they got rid of him too.
And he went to Racing Bulls.
Right.
I didn't know that.
The strategy is about as good as Ferrari 2022. It's terrible. And they're developing a good car. Yes. Just like Ferrari in 2022 did. They're developing a great car. That car, I bet, is a better car right now than the RB21 is. I actually think if you put Max in that car, he might have won the race or come close.
Wow,
I,
that's
I
saying something.
I just think it's an easier car to drive. It's more predictable. It doesn't seem to have handling quirks. It seems super stable, and we all know the RB21 is not stable. Max labors mightily to keep that on track because it's fast the way it's set up for what it is. But I gotta tell you, just to see Yuki go from like P4 pits and comes out of the points, it's just a tragedy.
He was gutted when they were interviewing him after the race, when they interview all the drivers and, they're asking him the questions. And the poor guy, I just felt so bad for him because he's like, yeah. And because in his mind, he's like, here it is again. This has happened to him so many times where he's having a great race and somehow they screw the strategy up. Just bring the damn car home, man. Why are they always taking all these chances when you are probably sixth, seventh team on the grid, and you got fifth place? Just take it. Be happy.
Yeah,
just take it. Be
like,
conservative. Take it.
It's like they're trying to go for the win or something.
You're not going to win. You're not going to beat Lando. Come on, your car's not fast enough. You're not beating Max. You got fourth or fifth. So be happy with that. Come in, pit, get the inners on, finish the race in fifth or sixth, and take the points. I don't get that.
No,
Why do we get this? Why do we get this, Scott?
I don't know.
And these guys who get paid to do this don't get it. Tell me.
I don't understand it. I mean, it's like you see the right strategy and you see a guy like Kimi Antonelli. He overtakes Hulkenberg twice in the first stint. He overtakes Stroll in the first stint. He overtakes Alex Albon in the final stint. Overtakes Stroll again. And, you do the right strategy. You have a good car, a good driver, and that's what happens. And then you have a good car and a good driver, and you do terrible strategy, and then you end up basically like racing bulls, or you have an okay car and you do a bad strategy, and you end up like Ferrari.
Oh, I don't even want to get to Ferrari yet. Let's talk about Williams first before we get to Ferrari and talk about Alex Albon finishing fifth. At the race, he was fourth because they gave Kimi a 5-second penalty, but they overturned that. And now Kimi is fourth. If you didn't know that out there in the ether world, Kimi Antonelli was given a 5-second penalty because of an unsafe pit release. And then it turns out they found footage from the helicopter and went to the review and showed that footage. And it was deemed that Kimi Antonelli did not get an unsafe release. So he did reclaim fourth place, dropping Alex Albon down to fifth. And I think two of the stories, well, there's a lot of stories in this race. But one of them was the Williams looked fantastic.
It did, other than Carlos's torque surge crash, which
that was weird. Explain that. What happened, Scott?
I don't know what happened. I think he is unfamiliar with the characteristics of the engine after 4 years at Ferrari. And it seemed like he didn't know how the engine behaves in a certain mode at a certain speed. And it caught him out with you heard it on TV. It seemed to surge and accelerate and produce more power longer than he wanted it to. And that just brought him right around into the wall. And I think I chalked that up to unfamiliarity with the car. In comparison, he was fast. He wasn't as fast as Sainz in qualifying, or excuse me, as Albon. Albon qualified P6 and Carlos qualified P10. But that should have really been a nice double points haul for Williams, and it should have been, and instead it let other people sneak into the higher areas of the points, like Lance Stroll, Nico Hulkenberg, and frankly the Ferraris, who should be thanking their lucky stars that Carlos crashed. Because I'm telling you, if Carlos didn't crash, Carlos would have finished ahead of both Ferraris, in my opinion. The Ferraris were so bad because of the strategy.
They were bad. The strategy was bad. Their pace wasn't that great. But before we get to them, I wanted to talk about what Carlos Sainz did and what an ultimate teammate. He crashed out with that surge. Then he went to the pit wall. He was the one who actually called the strategy for Alex to come in early and get the inners. And I found that very interesting because they had James Voles after talking about it. And he said, actually, the call came from Carlos. Carlos was sitting a couple cues down for me on the pit wall, and he's the one who was looking at the rain data and said, "Hey, we need to go to inners now." And I was like, Carlos Sainz is awesome, man. The guy just knows.
Ferrari, he would tell his race engineer, "No, that strategy doesn't work. I'm coming in now, or I'm not coming in now. Leave me alone." He's very good at that. And frankly, Williams' strategy last year was awful.
Yeah.
And it usually involves staying out too long on
Mhm.
tires and hoping that they last, their one-stop strategy, which is a recipe for disaster.
Right.
By the way, though, it's why George Russell is so good at keeping tires alive for a
Mm.
long time, because he did it for 3 years. But the reality of it all is their strategy has not been very good. And putting Carlos on the pit wall to call strategy for Albon when Carlos was out was a great use of his time. But it's also, that is who Carlos is. Carlos is the consummate team player in F1. Every team he's been with, be it McLaren or Ferrari, has been, or Renault, has been sad to see him go.
Yeah.
He added to the team. He's a team player. He makes the team better, not just himself better. And he's like a younger Valtteri that way. He's very selfless when it comes to that kind of stuff. If it's not him trying to pass somebody on track, he tries to
You
build up the team.
that's a great point, Scott, that when you saw the other drivers DNF, they hang their head and they just was crying and they were never to be seen. Carlos Sainz crashed out.
Mhm.
He went right to the pit wall and he's like, "How can I help my team get the best result for Alex Albon?"
He's
And
not.
that's the difference between a consummate professional team player than
Mhm.
somebody who's like, "Woe is me." Like, because things like that are going to happen. You're a rookie. Bortoletto crashed. All these guys, basically all the rookies, but Kimi crashed. Am I right? Who else made it? I think
Chairman,
Berman.
that's it.
He
Ollie,
finished last.
yeah, Ollie
Yeah.
and Kimi. Look, Ollie drove a very cautious race because he did not want to crash again. He didn't want that video showing of him crashing in a race. He took no risks. He knew they didn't have the car for points, which the car was horrible.
Yeah,
And
the
he
cars
was
bad.
super conservative. But look, Carlos is somebody who I think one day will be a team principal or something like that,
He should
because
be.
he's got that racing mind. He sees the whole race. He's great on strategy. He understands. He plays three-dimensional chess when he's in the car, like the time when he used DRS to win Singapore, by dragging Lando, who'd be
Yeah.
slower than he is today,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
fend off Lewis and George, who were much faster. And that's just that's the way that he adds value. He's not the most naturally fast driver in F1, but he makes up for it with his brain, and that's why he manages to get wins when maybe he shouldn't.
Well, that brings us up to a great segue to talk about a great brain and a great racing strategy, then to go to Ferrari. I mean, Ferrari. Oh man! First of all, I think Lewis and Charles need to do what Carlos Sainz does, and they need to start calling more of the strategy. Which I was really surprised that Lewis didn't say, "Hey, I'm coming in. I'm going to pit right now. Be ready. It's wet out here." He says that they didn't give him the information. Can you believe that?
Well, one thing about Ferrari's defense, he was pretty rude and harsh to Ricardo Otomi, his engineer on the radio. And once you're that way, where you're saying, "Leave me alone, don't give me any information," because Ricky was telling him, "Do this, do this, do this." We know it's your first time out racing, and he was telling him to basically be quiet. That's not helpful to communication. So I don't know if he would have gotten it had they had more of a good rapport. I felt like Lewis was really missing Bono in that race, and Bono was being amazing with Kimi. Bono is just on another level. I think he's just so good. But you know, Ferrari did the same mistake that Racing Bulls did. They kept them out too long, and they got undercut by people, and they turned a mediocre race into a lousy one. And they should have also been up 4 or 5, maybe. Certainly not higher than Kimi Antonelli, who was faster, or George, who was faster. But they should have finished ahead of Williams and Hulkenberg and
But just think,
geez.
if they would have done the strategy right, and they would have pitted when Max pitted, they would have came out ahead of George Russell.
Yep.
And if both Ferraris are ahead of George Russell, one of them is definitely going to finish on the podium. And because it started really getting torrential downpour,
Yeah.
so Hamilton would have came out ahead. Leclerc had better pace, would have probably passed him, and then he could have held off George, and Leclerc would have been on the podium, or maybe Hamilton would have been on the podium. Who knows? But they didn't do it, and it was so obvious to everybody and their mother, except for them.
Well, another thing is, if you want to do a strategy play, you have two cars. No one splits their strategy anymore. It's crazy because
Why?
because they're so afraid of the driver. Because when you split your strategy, there's going to be a winner and a loser.
Okay.
And I think they're afraid in a team like Ferrari of having a winner and a loser. Even though it's not intentional necessarily, you take a gamble. It's sort of like when you trade stocks, you hedge, you do a hedging play for the same reason. And I don't know why more teams just don't split the strategy when they have two cars and they have nothing to lose and not winning, but they have a shot at getting on the podium. And teams never want to split strategy anymore because they're just too afraid of backlash when one of the drivers doesn't do well. But that's better than none of the drivers doing well, which is what
That's
happened.
why I miss Ross Brawn, because he didn't play that game. Ross Brawn would split the strategy. He didn't care about it's about the team.
Right.
It's about us getting them as many points in this weekend as possible. And if
Yep.
your feelings are hurt, maybe this sport isn't for you. That's what he would tell him. He'd get him, hey, oh, we split the strategy. Oh, well, you're favoring him. This is about the team. This is not about you. You drive for us. If you don't like it, go find somewhere else to drive. There's only 20 drivers. Go find somewhere else. 22 next year.
Only one Ross Brawn.
And you're so right on that. And I was talking, and this is interesting. I was talking to this lady we were at AAU basketball table for my son.
Oh,
And
cool.
she just started watching Formula One because of our show, actually.
Oh.
And, because I was telling her we do Formula One show, and her son watches Formula One. So now their family's watching our show and watching Formula One. And she said, Sherm, how come Ferrari didn't split the strategy? And I said, just what you said. I said, because teams are a bunch of, pussies now. They are so afraid of hurting one of their drivers' feelings that they don't split strategy. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Especially when you're not in the hunt for the win, but you could potentially get P3 if you get it right. And so Ferrari got it wrong twice. They got it wrong with Lewis and wrong with Charles, and they were both angry, and they were both quite mouthy to their engineer. The exchange where Charles is going back and forth with Brian Bozzi about the cockpit being wet, and
there it is. a leakage of what? I have the seat full of water, like full of water. Must be the water. Let's add that to the words of wisdom.
Yeah, but of course, it's either leakage, meaning hydraulic fluids, battery fluid, something that could burn you or potentially disable you or whatever. And he's saying, no, it's the water, because you would see that kind of stuff on the telemetry coming in from the car. And
right.
If there's a leakage of anything, they see it right away.
Look at these other Ferrari quotes, Scott. This is what the Hamilton radio, and they kept saying K1 is available. So I guess that's their push to pass. Their power button on Ferrari.
Yeah, they call it
the
overtake button.
And Hamilton's like, basically telling them, leave me alone. And then he tells him again, you can use it. And he's like, I'm not close enough. I'm not close enough. I know how to. He's basically telling him, dude, this is not my first rodeo. Come on. And then Leclerc, they're talking about you have to cool down your left tire. And Leclerc's like, please stop telling me these obvious things. And is that something? Isn't Charles used to this? And my question to you is, since Charles has been dealing with this for 4, 5, 6 years over and over again, why have they not fixed it?
I don't know. I mean, you didn't see a lot of bad strategy calls last year.
No.
I think what you really saw, because Charles is normally not so nasty to Brian, although he's nastier to Brian than he was to Javi. I think he and Brian are a little more buddy bros, where they do that Max and GP thing. I think that's what But I think what you really saw out of both Lewis and Charles was an incredible amount of frustration. There was this huge buildup, huge media push. Ferrari, this is our year. 2025 is it. Those championships are coming back to Maranello, which I would personally love. And then they get a
Me too.
car that is not, at least as of now, competitive with the McLaren. It's at a minimum the second best car. And on that track in the wet, it was really not the second best car. It was behind Mercedes, and frankly, it was behind Williams, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, you're right.
you know, I think that what you saw is a lot of frustration from the drivers because they're under a lot of pressure to perform, and they got they got machinery that was garbage, and they got strategy calls that were garbage, and they were pissed and they were lashing out. And unfortunately, the only one you can really lash out at during a race is
Your engineer.
your engineer.
He's the only person you're talking to. So,
You
did
have
you
to have,
see this meme about the Ferrari headaches?
no.
Hypertension, stress, Ferrari.
Yeah, I
So,
was.
so for the people listening on the podcast on the radio only or your car only, we're posting types of headaches, and it says migraine. So it has the red just for in the front of your head, and then it has hypertension in the red in the back of your head, and stress will like a loop around your head, and then it says Ferrari, and your whole head's red.
And neck.
Because it's the frustration. Oh, now let's talk a little bit about my favorite guy who had a fabulous qualifying, Mr. Yuki Tsunoda, who we all know should be in that Red Bull, but isn't. And
Mhm.
he had a great qualifying, a gutting race. Where does Yuki go from here? Because it keeps happening to him. And what's Yuki do now?
Andretti. I got
Yeah.
to tell you, if I'm Andretti, I'm looking at who's the fastest driver who's available, who doesn't have a contract. And I think it's probably Yuki Tsunoda. He's fast. He's quick. I mean, this guy was on pace for like a Q5, excuse me, a P4, P5, and then they murder him with strategy, and he's suddenly P11, and it keeps happening. He's never going to be. It doesn't matter how many times Liam bins that car. They don't think Yuki, frankly, in my opinion, looks and sounds like a Red Bull driver. I'll just say it because I'm sick of being polite about it. They
Okay.
just don't. And I'm sick of seeing it because Red Bull constantly makes, I think, poor choices in drivers other for that second seat based on things other than merit. And frankly, not giving Yuki that seat was a crime against the sport and a crime against him. And I think it's because he doesn't look like who they want in their car. Period. Full stop.
Thank you for saying that, Scott.
Sick of
Yeah,
it.
I think it's obvious to us, but no one really. It seems like none of the pundits and none of the people we read about in the magazines want to say what
They
you
don't,
just said.
they don't want to lose their
And
access to Red Bull because what'll
yeah,
happen is, in the F1 paddock, if you piss off a team, they won't consent to interviews. They won't cooperate with you. They'll freeze you out. I don't care. When I go to these 4, 5, 6 races a year, I go to watch and to take pictures, and I don't need videos, and I don't need anyone's consent to do that because we're in, we're whatever. Bottom line is Yuki needs to get out of the Red Bull family. He will never be treated with respect. He's not treated with respect. And it's time to leave. There's no seat available at Aston Martin, period. I mean, Fernando's not going anywhere yet, and they're not firing Lance. And anybody who thinks that Lawrence Stroll is about to fire his son, who scored P6, finished P6, a good justification for keeping him in another year, is crazy. The man has spent hundreds of millions of dollars of money, is losing billions on Aston Martin, which is going in the tank stock-wise. Why is that? Because of his love for his son, to give his son a shot at the world championship. So Yuki's not going to Aston Martin except as a reserve driver, which I'm sure he doesn't want. There's no seat at Sauber. I mean, there's very few seats up now because people have been, because of what happened this year. And so the best opportunity for him, I think, and I hope they're looking at him, at Andretti is with Andretti. I mean, do they really want an old, washed driver who's past his sell date, or do they want somebody
No,
who's in the prime of his
you
career? Who Yuki is an experienced F1 driver by now. They want an experienced F1 driver. He's that already. He is an experienced F1 driver. Give him that role. Give Colton the other seat. Colton is clearly getting the American seat. Put the two of them together and let them work some magic.
Yeah, I wonder who Yuki's do you know Yuki's manager? Because that would be something that he should be working on, like, now.
I
Like,
don't.
he should be reaching out to, Cadillac Andretti
Mhm.
and trying to get that seat because he belongs in F1, and
Yes.
if for some reason this man is not in F1 next year, what you said about Red Bull is true for other teams, obviously. And it's not right.
Well,
Yuki's good. Yuki should be in F1. Yuki's a talent. People like Yuki. He's good for your brand. And I'm
mhm,
pretty sure he could sell a lot of t-shirts, cars, and hats.
mhm.
And he's good for marketing. He's just a nice kid. He's short, he's lovable, he's a cuddly little Yuki bear. We love
Yeah,
Yuki on this channel.
yeah.
And I hope and I pray that what you said takes some traction because what Helmut Marko said about a lot of these rookies. Did you see Isaac Hadjar? He had a moment, and look at that. There is Mr. Hamilton, Lewis Hamilton's dad,
Anthony Hamilton.
consoling him, and you have that. And now juxtapose this, and I don't know if you saw what Helmut Marko said. He
Sure did.
said, "You see Isaac crying in the paddock." He said something like, I'm paraphrasing, and maybe you can help me along.
He said
Something
it's
like,
embarrassing.
yes, he said
It's
it was an
embarrassing.
embarrassment, and an F1 driver shouldn't be crying in the paddock or something like that.
Can I tell you something about that? You know who would cry occasionally? Michael Schumacher. When they asked Michael Schumacher what it felt like, for example, to break Senna's record of wins, he started bawling, the point where Mika Hakkinen had to console him. When Mika Hakkinen has cried when things haven't gone well, just for a few examples, when Lewis has won, like when Lewis won Silverstone for the last time in black, he was crying. Um, and so to sit there and say that it's unbecoming an F1 driver, then basically let's take some of the greatest men who've ever driven the sport and throw them out the window too. Maybe put in Helmut Marko, who was a failure as an F1 driver. Great. That's the role model. You know what? Get the hell out of Dodge, retire. You've had your show. As Bortoletto said, you're not making very good choices at who you're putting in anyway. Maybe it's time to put Sebastian Vettel in that role. Get a human being with a brain and some empathy and a love for the drivers in there. And let's see what Seb can do. Because Marco is hurting the team once again. You know, he talked about South American drivers being bad with Checo, who of course is North American. And you see the racism, and you know, you see what happens to Yuki, and you see what the words of Isaac, who is Arab, and you just see it's just
Toxic.
it's a bad
Toxic.
it's a
It's
bad
not
look.
only is it a bad look, it's a bad thing for your brand because
Yeah.
he represents the drink that everybody has in their bar. Every time you get a vodka, what do you get? What do you get? You say, "I want to."
You
Come
tell
on,
me.
Scott, help me
I'm
out.
not much of
Come
a
on,
drinker.
Scott.
You tell me. I want Red
Scott,
Bull.
you want a Red Bull? You because Red Bull gives you wings, right? Right? I mean, it gives
Apparently,
you
it does give me.
wings, right?
Um,
Isn't that what they
but
say?
the only wings that I want Yuki to wear from Red Bull are the wings to fly the hell out of there. Let's give
Yeah.
him some wings from Red Bull and get him out. Look, Red Bull has some awesome team members. You know, Callum Nicholas was amazing. Jonathan Wheatley, who's amazing. They're no longer with the team.
Mhm.
But they've got some hardworking, great team members. But some of the stuff that the management says and does makes it very hard to cheer for them. Max is best driver by far, I think, on the grid. But some of the stuff the management says and does are just horrible. And to sit there and say that Isaac, who's there, his parents are there, he's worked his whole life to get into F1. He qualifies P11, the best of any of the rookies, better than Antonelli. And, he makes a mistake on the formation lap. No question. He hits the gas a little too hard, and that just spun him around. But then to excoriate him for being embarrassing, and like I said, if he's embarrassing, then Schumacher, Hakkinen, and Hamilton are all embarrassing, who have 16 world championships between them.
Yeah, that's very well said, Scott. Very well said. Let's go to winners and losers, Scott.
Yep.
Give me your. Let's start with the losers.
Ah,
Give
the
me
number
your
one
loser.
loser, McLaren team orders. Oscar Piastri is not P1 or P2 because that team order destroyed his race.
Okay.
Yes, he didn't make the fatal mistake then, but he was about to become the race leader. And who knows how much better the race would have been. To do team orders on the first race in the other driver's home Grand Prix when he's about to take the lead is insane. So I think that was a mistake. That's my biggest loser.
Okay. I'm gonna go with the Australian Grand Prix. I'm gonna go with the track because every time a car crashed, look how long it took for the tractor to get to the car to get it off of the track. Why don't they have them every, I don't know, football field or football field and a half so you
Yeah.
can get quick access? Why does it take so long? I think one of the cars, it took like 6 laps to get the car off of the track. I was like, what are you doing? Because people
Mhm.
out there, when you pay for these F1 races and a car crashes, they're still counting the laps. Even though they're behind the safety car, the laps are still going down. So
Mhm.
while you're not watching any action, say the accident happened on lap 3 and they didn't clear the track till lap 9, well, that's 6 laps of racing you just lost. And I think that in the modern age, they should have more access to these tractors every so often, spend the money and get these cars off of the track. That was a travesty.
Well, Formula One is not big on spending money. They're big on taking money. I mean, you see that. Like I said, there's no AMR safety team equivalent like there is in the United States with your IMSA, NASCAR, if you're an IndyCar. The second a crash happens, even on a road course, 4 or 5 trucks with dedicated medics and mechanics swarm the crash site. Get the drivers out of there immediately within seconds
Immediately.
and immediately take them to the paddock. And yet F1, which has 1,000 times more money than our motorsports here in America, has a
Mhm.
lousy medical car and to go one for the whole track. It's just and relies on the locals for everything else. I don't get it. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. It's insulting given the ticket prices. But I don't run F1. Perhaps when MBS is gone one day, when Susie Wolf or somebody runs it, maybe Claire Williams or somebody runs it, that'll be different.
Give me your second loser, Scott. Who else you got?
I'd have to say my beloved Ferrari. They were bad. I mean, just the cars were mediocre. The drivers were rattled. They were, like I said, pretty rude to the engineers. The strategy was terrible, in keeping them out too long. And
Mhm.
it was just a very disappointing race for a team that I love. And I really hope that will get better. But the fact the car didn't perform as up to standards is going to ring some alarm bells in Maranello, I think.
I
Uh,
think so too. Because they look good. At least Charles Leclerc looked good in practice. He looked like the car was podium ready, and then all of a sudden qualifying happened and the pace just went away. And I was like, wait, because Lewis was the strongest in the first sector,
yep.
and he was purple in first sector, and Charles was purple in the third sector. So I was like, okay, they're probably gonna be like fifth and sixth in qualifying around there, maybe fourth and fifth, and then it was eighth, and I was like, what just happened? I'm
Yeah.
hoping it's the. I'm just hoping it's the wet weather. That's what I'm hoping, that the car's just not ready for that yet. Maybe they brought the wrong package or something. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, it was bad, but they really were a loser this weekend. They did not perform up to expectations or even remotely close to that. I mean, they are behind Williams in the drivers' championship. They're behind Aston Martin. They're behind teams that. I mean, it's only one race, but it doesn't reflect who Ferrari is.
Right. Now, one of my losers are these 3. I mean, I
Oh,
unfortunately, all 3 of these guys are rookies, and all 3 of these guys, that's Gabriel Bortoleto, that is Who is that over there on the left?
That
That isn't that
that is Jack Doohan and Ollie
not
Bearman.
Jack Doohan? Yes, that's Jack Doohan right there. Yeah, because he
I
has his
would
head turned.
I'm with you on 2 of the 3, but I'll wait for you.
Which one aren't you with?
Gabriel Bortoleto, his rear suspension collapsed. That caused his crash.
Is that what causes crash?
Yes, he hit a curb and the suspension collapsed. It should never have collapsed, but it did.
Okay.
So I don't put him in that. The guy out qualified Hulkenberg, who's a fantastic qualifier, made it
Yeah.
into Q2. I think he had a very solid race, and he just got killed by an equipment failure. The other two,
Poor
Doohan,
Doohan.
Doohan was fast in quali.
He
Then
did. Yeah.
he was likely actually to make Q3, and then Lewis spun out in front of him and killed his push lap, which was looking good enough for Q3. But then he got into the race, and obviously the crash early on in the initial lap was a disaster. No,
Yeah.
he accelerated when he was in a painted line and it's wet. And unlike any other track in F1, Australia doesn't use the FIA slip resistant paint. And
Because it's a regular road during the day, right?
correct, and I don't know if you still can, but they don't. And when it's wet, it's a recipe for what happened to various drivers. It's very dangerous because a painted line, I mean, even on an FAA F1 track like I've been on, they
Mhm.
still tell you to stay away from that stuff, even though it's somewhat slip resistant. It doesn't have the grip of regular pavement or asphalt. So, but I got to tell you though, he was disappointing, and Ollie had the worst week of the 4 race weekends that he's had. I mean, he, in total shunt in one in FP1, another shunt in FP3. The car's so damaged that the gearbox breaks in quali, so he can't do it. So he starts at the pit lane, and then I think he was so scared during the race. I think he was petrified during the race, and he just wanted not to crash. And you can't race that way.
You can't race that way, but I was wondering why the Haas looks so damn bad. I mean, they actually were pretty decent last year.
Yeah,
It was the first year where they made enough money with the prize pool that Gene Haas didn't have to actually put money into the team. So I was like, okay, things are looking up for Haas, and then Ocon's pretty racy. I mean, say what you want about the guy. I know he kind of puts people the wrong way because he hates his teammates, it seems like, and he always wants to crash into his teammates. But the guy's fast,
yes,
and they're way in the back of the pack. I mean, they're so far off the pace. What happened?
I don't know. And Ao Komatsu basically said that there's a big problem. They need to start working on fixing it. Their cars were just clearly the worst car. I mean, when you have a Sauber torching them, things are bad at Haas. I don't know, but it didn't look like the Haas cars of last year because
Yeah,
Ocon, we saw what he's capable of in the rain in Brazil. I mean, he was P2, and only Max bested him. And I expected him to have a really good race, frankly, yesterday. And the car's just not there. It looks very dangerous to drive. It looks very difficult to drive, uncooperative, difficult to handle. It looks like a handful. And I'm not sure what the problem is, but the car seems to have handling issues. It's not the engine.
yeah. It's strange that you wouldn't just improve on the car you had last year that did so well for you. Like you would go 100. It looks like it's almost a 90-degree turn from what they were doing last year. Like they tried some new concept and it's just not working at all. That car, it's a dog. It's a dog of a car. It looked really hard to drive. I was watching Ollie in practice, and then you know how you go on F1 TV, you can go to watch the drivers
Yep.
like their telemetry. And so I click on Ollie and he's fighting that car. And I was like, wow, that car looks really hard to drive. I'm no driving expert, as Mike would always say, but I've been to a Holiday Inn Express before, and it's horrible to drive. He's
When you see
fighting
the
the
drivers
car.
hacking away at the wheel that much,
Yeah,
car going, there's a problem. When you're making that many corrections, you're also, by the way, slowing yourself down. When you make
mm,
corrections, you're going slower because you're introducing friction and things like that. When you make that many corrections, it means the car is hard to control, and you're going to end up going slower because you have no choice. But yeah, bad, big loser.
all right. Let's get to our winners, Scott. Why
Mhm.
don't you start off with your winners of the Australian Grand Prix?
Well, Andrea, Kimi, Antonelli.
Oh,
I
you love that kid so much. Oh my
do
god.
not.
Oh my god, you're so in love with him. Oh my
You
god.
love him. He's such
You
a
got
nice.
pictures of him on your wall. Come on, let's see it. Come on, let's see back there. I know you got some pictures of Kimmy
No,
back
although
there.
we did put up on our page a post of him tickling his teammates in the Austin Team Mercedes hotel last year.
Uh-huh.
He came up to them when they were checking out and started attacking them. And then you see one of his teammates intervene and push him away. And but I mean, come on. I mean, debut race, he gets P4. This is the stuff that dreams are made of.
It is.
I knew he was going to be fast. The Mercedes people told me when I was in their paddock club, when I was in their Silver Hours Lounge, that his performance numbers in the tests were unbelievable.
Mhm.
And I believed them because I'd hear the same things in the press. And I really believe there's no way Toto, even if he likes the kid, is going to pluck him, is going to put him in F1 with Toto's own prestige on the line with the board at Mercedes and his own future as team principal at stake if he gets it wrong. He's not putting him in that car because he likes him. He's putting him in that car and pushing Lewis out of the way to make a seat for him, which is exactly what he did because he believed in him.
Well, I'm going to go, and I know your head's gonna explode. I'm gonna go with George Russell. I'm gonna go with the other seat in the
Mhm.
Mercedes. Mr. Saturday qualified great as usual. And when people were saying, "Oh, it's the car," and we know there was some shenanigans going on with Lewis last year as far as the finishes and how things happen. But George can qualify his ass off.
Yeah.
And if you give this guy a better car, I will not be surprised if he goes on like one of those Max or Lewis strings of old where he out qualifies everybody for like 3, 4, 5 races in a row. The man can drive one lap. And he did a great job. He was basically racing his own race for most of that race. He
That's
was
right.
in Yeah, most of the time he was in 3rd or 4th and he was by himself.
I got to tell you, he is very lucky that Kimi qualified so poorly in 16th because
What?
Kimi's race pace was faster. If you go and look at the fastest laps,
Okay.
Kimi's fastest lap on lap 43
Was.
was
Dun, 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 dun.
faster than George. Kimi pulled a 124.901, and
Okay.
George was 1.5 was 15 tenths behind. It was 1.5 tenths behind. 125.065. And you saw
So
Kimi go faster, faster, faster.
yeah.
But George is a really good qualifier, and George is a good racer. And he gave himself such a margin on Kimi that there's no way Kimi was catching him.
Now my other thing I liked about George, and I'm starting to like because we all know I wasn't a big George fan,
Yep.
but there's a couple reasons why I'm starting to warm up to him.
Yeah.
One, he stood up to Max. He didn't take any crap from him.
Nope.
Two, in the cool down room, he sat on the other side. Max was on this side,
Mhm.
and he didn't act buddy buddy. He was like, "Okay, yeah, there's a little friction, and I'm sticking with it." And I was like, "Yeah, George, yeah. You don't have to, show off for the cameras. You don't have to be somebody you're not. Stick
Mhm.
to who you are. Stick to your guns and to what your beliefs are." And so I really respect that about him. I
Yeah,
really do.
I saw him step up in Las Vegas when Lewis was not quite on his level that race last
Mhm.
year, and he was the team leader. Every practice was great. Quali was P1, pole to pole to checkered flag win. Look, if you give George the car that Mercedes used to have, like a W11, you saw what he did with the W11 with no experience. He was winning the race until they put on half a valve for his tires and killed his race. And then he had a puncture the next time.
Right.
We're just capable of competing for the world championship if you give him a car that can compete for the world championship. Right now, I don't think Mercedes has that car. It has a good car that's capable of podiums, but it's not McLaren. We
Right.
talk about the biggest winner, McLaren.
It has to be McLaren. That
No,
car is a jewel. It is not only is it quick, it's stable, and it looks like
Mhm.
they saved it's like that old Red Bull where they're saving pace. They're not the wick's not all the way turned up, you know? It's not even all the way up. They're just like, "Okay, we'll turn the engine down. We're
Mhm.
cruising into this championship."
It's
That's what it looked
stable,
like.
it's planted, it's fast, it's good on all tracks, just like last year. They've got two outstanding drivers who are going to be there for a long time because they've been locked out of long-term contracts. They just locked Oscar down through at least 2027 this week and put him on the same salary as Lando at 20 million pounds. And they look like they are going to be unstoppable. I think for the World Constructors Championship, and I think Lando is the clear favorite for the drivers.
Yeah, I'm really happy for Zach Brown and Andrea Stella. I'm really happy for McLaren because, since 1998, since last year before they won their World Constructors title, and to
Mhm.
see such an iconic team back on top, it's gratifying for Formula One fans because we've been waiting for anybody other than Red Bull,
Yeah,
and here it is.
just like people were waiting for anyone other than Mercedes for a while because they got sick of
Right.
Mercedes winning. Look, it also gives help to a team like Williams that you can come from the back or from because they were at the bottom at one point. No question about it. They were the worst team in F1 or just about it. And Fernando, the GP2 engine saga, and then even at the beginning of 2023, the car was last. And it shows you that with the right leadership, and I think a lot with somebody like Estella, but I think even more importantly, the guy who you don't hear a lot about is Rob
Mhm.
Marshall, who came from Red
Who?
Bull. The big fat guy, the technical director, Rob Marshall, who was up on the podium, that big
Okay.
heavy guy.
Yeah.
That's the guy. That guy can see air. He's known for this. He's the king of flexible wings. This is what his reputation has always been.
Okay.
And somebody is designing them a great car. That's who it is. It's not
Wow.
Andrea Stella. He's an engineer. It's Rob Marshall, that big guy who they put up on the podium. What I'm dying to see is what happens at Spain when they have to use new front wings that aren't as flexible. And I think,
Because that's they changed the regulations coming up, right? For
yes, then we will. Then until then, I think McLaren is running the table or close to it
Okay.
until Spain. Albeit Spain, I'm dying to see what happens. But I think that I'll be with Mercedes that week.
Mhm.
I think that is when the season may change. But through Spain, I think McLaren is going to do what Red Bull did at the beginning of last year. I think, look, you can never count out Max. Max is the best driver in the sport, but his car stinks this year. It looks like it's not close to being the best or the second best. And because Lando is such a good driver, so fast, and he's got that car, Lando, I think, is going to cruise to a big lead in the World Championship and McLaren in the World Constructors Championship. Yep.
Uh, so it's gonna be so your prediction after race 1 is Lando Norris Drivers' Championship and
Unless something
McLaren
changes in Spain.
unless
Unless they
something
bubble.
changes.
Yes.
And then we would see who?
What do you mean? Number two?
Yeah, who?
Max or Oscar Piastri?
Do you in the development war, is this Red Bull gonna develop or are they just gonna throw their chips in the next year?
I don't have any confidence that an Adrian Newey derived car can be developed without Adrian Newey. We've seen Red Bull go off a cliff when Newey left. We
Mhm.
saw Dan Fallows leave Adrian Newey's side, go to Aston Martin, and take those ideas. And the first car in 2023 was amazing. But the second he had to develop it, what happened to them? Exactly. And no, I don't think Red Bull is going to have a winning car this year. What they have is a legendary goat of a driver. And whatever he can get out of that car, he will, which is what you can never count Max out. But I think it's going to be a much tougher year this year for him than last year because they don't have that cushion of 5 races or so where they won 4 of them
So does that mean if this
with double
car's
podiums.
not that great, does that mean Liam Lawson's gonna have a really, really bad season and make them regret getting rid of Checo?
Look, I think them getting rid of Checo wasn't a stupid move. What was a really stupid move was not signing Carlos Sainz.
Well,
Catastrophic. Best
I
driver
heard
out
that had to do. Didn't you hear that had to do with Josh not liking Carlos Sainz Sr.?
There's a lot of talk that Max has a lead driver clause in his contract where he can reject whoever he wants.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that happened. I'm not Max. I'm not Jos, but I wouldn't be surprised. And it's consistent with Red Bull wanting to have a dominant driver and a second driver. And I don't think they wanted Carlos. But I got to tell you, if you have a lousy car, maybe you should scrap that policy for a few years because Carlos would get points out of the car. And I think Liam's going to have a tough go. I mean, I hope he doesn't. I just think unless you're dealing with a top driver in the world, that car is almost undrivable.
Well, you heard it here first. We're predicting that Lando Norris is going to win the Drivers' Championship after one race. And we're predicting that McLaren's going to win back-to-back constructor titles after one race. That's Scott's prediction. And I'm going to back him up on that because I really think that this is the year for Lando Norris. If he's going to win a world title, it's going to have to be this year because next year all bets are off and we don't know who, when they shuffle the deck, we don't know who's going to come up with the ace of spades. But we do know that McLaren Mercedes is the best car on the grid as we speak. And if they don't screw it up with their papaya rules, which drives everybody who loves racing crazy because it's too early for rules in the first race. But I want to thank Scott once again for hopping in and giving us some tidbits that maybe you didn't know out there in the ether world. And I really appreciate the take on Red Bull and Yuki because we all know I'm a big Yuki fan and I never really wanted to come out and say it, but I'm so happy that Scott really laid it out on the line and let you know, as whether you're watching us on YouTube or whether you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Amazon or any of the other podcasts, broadcasts, we bring you the real F1 for the fans and for the ultra fans and for the people who actually don't even just started watching F1 because they watch Drive Survive. Now, remember, we're doing every episode Drive to Survive recap. You can go to the site and you can go. And if you've never watched Drive to Survive, you can if you don't have Netflix, you can go and listen and we recap every show of it. So with that, we will see you next week when we go to China, as somebody would say. And with that, keep on racing, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention?